In a previous compilation on this channel, we explored 7 legendary lost treasures from the state of California, home to the storied goldfields of the Sierra Nevada and the Great Rush of 1849. California's mining history and folklore is so rich that one compilation was not enough. In this video, we explore 7 more lost treasure tales from the Golden State, from the lost bee mine of the Mojave Desert to Pyramid Lake's lost Chinese treasure. Join us as we uncover more true tales of buried treasure from California.
I am certain that for the ordinary weekend gold prospector, there comes a moment when he grows dissatisfied with his own hunting grounds and daydreams of packing up his belongings, leaving everything behind, and embarking on a journey to the enchanting, nugget-filled wonderland of California. He yearns to make a significant strike in the historically abundant and romantically captivating foothills of the Great Mother Lode. However, for the average individual living halfway across the country, this may appear to be an arduous and seemingly impossible expedition, one that must promise a bountiful return of gold to make the entire endeavor worthwhile. Rest assured, my dear reader, that such a feat is indeed achievable, despite the contrary tales you may have heard about the 49ers depleting all the gold back in the 1800s. The truth of the matter is that you will need to possess a level of astuteness surpassing that of the 49ers themselves, who possessed scant knowledge of the peculiar geological conditions that so astonishingly enriched the western foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The primary objective of this discourse is to acquaint you, the aspiring prospector, with these geological phenomena and the specific regions where your chances of returning home with a sack brimming with gold are most promising. Let us commence by perusing a map of California. As our eyes scan its contours, 2 principal features shall boldly emerge above all others: the Mojave Desert and the Sierra Nevada mountain range, stretching from the northern reaches of Mount Lassen to a point approximately 70 miles north of Los Angeles in the south. It is this area upon which we shall focus our attention, although it must be acknowledged that every conceivable locale within the state possesses some measure of gold content. Merely a few years prior, a vein of viable gold ore was discovered in a populated hillside canyon in none other than Beverly Hills. However, let us redirect our gaze towards the Sierra Nevada, particularly the central and northern portions, commencing from a point just southwest of Mariposa in the Central Range and extending to the vicinity of Quincy in the far north. Within this expanse lies the crucial gold-bearing districts, where the opulent veins of gold quartz were uncovered, as well as the stranded beds of ancient rivers that flowed long before the advent of humankind. Fear not, for we shall bestow upon these venerable waterways the attention they deserve in due course. In the magical realm of gold prospecting, the Mother Lode weaves its enchanting tale. Stretching for 120 miles, this fault zone in the Earth's crust was infused with gold and quartz during the Jurassic period, creating a treasure-filled wonder. But hark! The Mother Lode is not a singular vein, but a collection of parallel systems, each with its own riches. The crown jewel, 1 mile wide, spans from Mariposa to Georgetown, sparkling with golden quartz veins. Once, the rivers danced with gold near the Sierra streams, a boon for the 49ers. Alas, the rivers now lay tamed by California's flood control project, hidden beneath hundreds of feet of water. Yet hope flickers in the reservoir's wake and a few miles downstream. But beware, dear seeker, for State 49. The Great Highway follows the course of the Mother Lode, leaving the panning spots devoid of fortune. To strike gold's gleaming embrace, one must tread a different path. The suction dredge, a miraculous device, unveils rich gravel from river bottoms, a sluice box's delight. For those earnest in their quest, this investment may repay in seconds, unveiling the golden secret. But heed my words, newcomers, for without such dredges, grand bonanzas remain elusive. The professionals, the scuba teams of the Sierras, venture into the most treacherous canyons, laden with equipment and camping gear, unearthing fortune through their steadfast dedication. So brace yourself, dreamer, for the journey is arduous, but the rewards, oh, how they glitter. Once upon a time in the mystical land of California, a tale of ancient rivers begins. Non-dredgers, heed this advice. Venture downstream from the revered crossings of the Motherlode River, where the currents converge with the reservoirs. Seek out the Merced, the Tuolumne, the Stanislaus, Calaveras, Mocolumne, and Cosumnes rivers, for there lies your initial prospecting grounds. Gaining experience in these waters shall prepare you for the next chapter of our study, the Golden Tertiary River Channels. But as with any enchanting story, we must embark on a journey that unveils the past, allowing us to grasp the present fully. Picture, if you will, a time machine nestled within a wondrous helicopter, capable of traversing the strands of time. Together, we shall venture backward to an era known as the Eocene, a logical epoch within the Cenozoic era, the era of new life. 5 preceding epochs, including the Paleocene and Pliocene, collectively form the Tertiary, from which our channels derive their name. As we step into this magnificent contraption, setting the controls for a distant era, we are transported back to a time before the Americas were discovered, before pyramids reached for the heavens. We find ourselves 58 million years in the past, where the grandeur of the Sierra Nevada is but a humble range of low foothills. Our time machine hovers, suspended in this primordial moment. Gazing upon the desolate landscape, our eyes witness the majestic rivers meandering through vast valleys, nestled between the undulating hills. In the distance, these rivers converge, cascading into one another until they unite as a mighty force, pouring into an expansive inland sea. Little do we know that this very space shall later transform into the bountiful Central Valley of California, a testament to the passage of time and the ever-changing tapestry of nature's creation. If we were to set foot upon the ancient soil of Eocene California, we would be met with a climate almost unbearable, a stifling atmosphere heavy with moisture and rich in oxygen far beyond what we know in our present time. Though invisible to our eyes, this oxygen-rich air holds within it the erosion of the magnificent veins of gold quartz that grace the foothills, and with the relentless downpour of torrential rains, the newly eroded gold is carried by the flowing rivers, sinking to the depths where it seems lost for all eternity. But fear not, for it is not lost. Now let us venture further in time to the epoch of the Tertiary, specifically the Pliocene. A peculiar sight awaits us, as rivers of molten rock, unlike any volcanic eruption we have witnessed, surge forth from the distant north, from a place that will one day be known as Mount Lassen National Park. From our vantage point, we witness the rivers we once knew vanishing before our very eyes, consumed by the relentless advance of the fiery lava. As the molten rock meets the riverbanks, billowing clouds of steam surround us, causing turbulence our pilot struggles to navigate. Progressing deeper into the Pliocene era, we find this phenomenon persisting as more and more rivers succumb to the fiery embrace until not a single waterway remains in the ancestral Sierra Nevada. Instead, all that stretches as far as the eye can see is an expanse of cooling lava, an ocean of hardened magma. Yet, amidst this cataclysmic transformation, something remarkable unfolds. For nature's whimsy reigns, and rain begins to fall upon this newly sculpted Pliocene landscape. As we are well aware, rain seeks its own path, following the course of least resistance. And in this altered terrain, it forms new rivers, carving fresh channels where the old ones once flowed before the lava's embrace. Let us depart from this gloomy era and venture back to the year 1973, where the rivers we witnessed taking shape now carve deep canyons, slicing through the ancient beds they once occupied during the Eocene. In the very paths where the new rivers intersect their former channels, all the precious gold that once lay within those beds is now concentrated in the sand and gravel bars of these fresh waterways. It was on a cold January morning in the year 1848 that this revelation came to light. For nearly 4 years, from 1848 to around 1852, the hills poured forth an incessant flow of gold. It was abundant, scattered across the bars of sand and gravel, even strewn upon the very surface of the earth. And those who ventured to explore the crossing points of the tertiary channels with the present-day rivers may still find remnants of this fortune. But beware, for to make a significant strike, one would require the aid of a dredge. Although I cannot present you with an actual depiction of a tertiary channel intersected by a river, I can offer you a cross-section of an imagined channel, akin to one of the ancestral Yuba River beds. Observe the illustration, and you shall find that a tertiary channel comprises 3 distinct layers: the upper gravel, pale and glistening like fresh snow, often referred to as the bench gravel, the intermediate red gravel, and the most prosperous stratum of all, the deep blue gravel, often known as the blue lead amongst miners. Each of these gravel layers possesses a trace of gold, but it is the blue layer that conceals the ultimate treasure. This is because the blue section represents the very bedrock of the tertiary channel. As the gold flakes were dislodged from the veins of the Eocene and carried by the currents into the rivers, the larger fragments descended to the depths, accumulating within crevices and potholes of the bedrock. As a result of this ancient sorting process, numerous drift mines that delved into the blue layers of various channels unearthed nuggets of unimaginable proportions. One such mine near the former town of Allegheny unearthed several 6-inch nuggets, yet not in the year 1848, but rather in the year 1938. In the mystical realm of Eocene California, where the rivers meander through ancient tertiary channels, a secret lies hidden. Not all rivers have pierced through their ancient counterparts, but it is within the deep canyons, plunging over 1,000 feet, that the ancient beds have been fully exposed. It is here that the rivers have set free the coveted treasure, the gold concealed within the fabled blue gravel layers. I am privileged to possess the knowledge of these sacred locations, yet the quest to find them is no easy feat. Though marked on a map, locating these channels in the vast wilderness is an entirely different challenge. You might believe that stumbling upon a crossing and delving into the blue gravel layer would bring you instant riches. And indeed, it may be true if you are fortunate enough to find one. But as you venture into the river canyons, where towering trees and thick pine needles cloak the slopes, the search for the elusive channels becomes more arduous than anticipated. There have been times when, unbeknownst to me, I have stood right beneath the richest crossing, oblivious to its presence. However, if you possess the approximate location and ascend the canyon from a mile downstream, the area where your pan yields scant gold is where I would start hacking my way up the canyon walls, seeking the hidden channel. It may demand toil, but if fortune favors you and you chance upon an untapped trove of blue gravel, yes, they do exist, believe it or not, you may find yourself free from the shackles of Monday morning labor. In my endeavor to aid you on your prosperous prospecting voyage, I shall divulge the precise spots, river by river, to commence your pursuit of nugget-filled dreams. Be forewarned, these locations lie in virgin lands, devoid of roads and scarce in trails. Yet it is assumed that if you seek great wealth, you are willing to toil and labor in the pursuit of golden splendor. Let us venture forth to the heart of the Motherlode and commence our journey northward, beginning at the Tuolumne River. As we embark on this quest for fortune, it is wise to bypass the Merced River, for it lacks a significant tertiary channel and is far too accessible for the serious prospector to consider. The Tuolumne River, however, presents 2 crossings by the tertiary Tuolumne River. The first crossing lies approximately 51 miles east of Chinese Camp, while the second awaits us roughly 2 miles upstream from the Lake Lloyd Road crossing bridge. Of the two, I recommend the first crossing, as it poses more challenges in terms of accessibility. Moreover, the South Fork of the Tuolumne also intersects with this same channel, a mere mile upstream from its convergence with the main Tuolumne River. Now let our gaze shift to the mighty Stanislaus River, where the tertiary Calaveras River graces its path about 33/4 miles northwest of Vallecito. This particular area calls for moderate effort to access. Take note, for this channel intertwines with certain creeks that flow into the South Fork of the Stanislaus, each deserving our meticulous attention. Furthermore, the rich cataract channel crosses both the north and middle forks of the Stanislaus, just upstream from the point where these 2 forks merge. Be warned, dear seekers of gold, for this region proves exceedingly challenging to reach. Alas, the Calaveras River, in terms of channel crossings, finds itself somewhat deprived, with only 2 to its name. One of these crossings lies beneath the New Hogan Reservoir, rendering it inaccessible. However, the North Fork of the Calaveras reveals promising areas, where gold from a channel in the headwaters near Railroad Flat can be found. Yet do not rely solely on this location, as the river is dammed just upstream from that point, causing its flow to fluctuate throughout the year. Downstream from the crossing, however, the river flows perennially, making it a worthwhile area to explore. Behold, the Mokelumne River, adorned with several channel crossings, though their surroundings lack isolation. The tertiary Calaveras River intersects the main fork approximately 11.2 miles northwest of the town of Mokelumne Hill, coinciding with the crossing of State 49. Although this particular spot does not garner high praise, venturing downstream for a few miles to the point where the river cascades into the back of the Pardee Reservoir can yield fruitful results. Additionally, the south and middle forks of the Mokelumne experience their own crossings, with the South Fork near the diminutive hamlet of Independence and the Middle Fork close to Wilseyville. Armed with this knowledge, we embark on a perilous and awe-inspiring expedition through the rivers of Eocene California in pursuit of the gleaming treasures hidden within their ancient beds. May fortune favor the bold, and may the rivers of gold guide our path. The Consumnes River boasts numerous crossings, although none are located on its main fork. In a bustling region, a branch of the tertiary Mokelumne River crosses the South Fork roughly 2 miles southeast of River Pines. This very channel proceeds to traverse the Middle Fork, approximately 1 mile northwest of Indian Diggings, and the North Fork, about 2 miles south of Baltic Peak. These final two areas warrant special attention due to their isolation and the exceptional richness of the channel they offer. Now, let us journey to the birthplace of it all, the Mother Lode, where the tale commenced on a fateful morning in Coloma. Situated on the South Fork of the American River, this little town witnessed the gold rush unfold in 1848. Today, the American River and its forks remain among the most abundant gold streams in the entire state. The 49ers barely scratched the surface of their gold potential. The South Fork of the American River harbors incredibly secluded spots, some of which hold immense promise for those equipped with large dredges capable of plunging 30 feet or more. However, these areas are so isolated that even the average prospector armed with a simple sluice can expect handsome returns. The first crossing on the Middle Fork lies approximately 2.5 miles southeast of Michigan Bluff. Another branch of the same channel intersects near Duncan Creek, where it converges with the Middle Fork. Additionally, a branch-off channel crosses the region where the French Meadows Reservoir stands today. It is worth directing your attention to areas a few miles below the initial two crossings due to the extreme difficulty in accessing the Middle Fork. The North Fork presents only one viable channel crossing in an isolated locale located about 1 mile north of Iowa Hill. However, the entire stretch of the North Fork, extending for miles upstream, exudes a beautifully primitive allure and poses significant challenges for entry. Any chosen spot within this region promises great potential for prosperity. Moving away from the forks of the American River, we encounter the Bear River. From this point onwards, the tertiary channels played host to the infamous hydraulic mines that polluted California's rivers in the previous century. Bear River is crossed by a branch of the tertiary Yuba River just west of Dutch Flat, the site of one of the huge hydraulic pits. The entire Bear River in this area is all very easy to get into, and it is advised you skip it completely. Should you desire gold from this river, however, there is an extremely rugged stretch, believe it or not, directly downstream from where State 49 crosses. This area should have some very nice gold, even though it is not replenished each year due to the large number of dams upstream from this point. Now, we arrive at the Yuba River and its forks, the creators of some of the largest gold nuggets discovered anywhere in the state, or anywhere else for that matter. Most of these were found in the North Fork, up in the Downeyville and Sierra City areas, and even today a number of large nuggets are found in these spots each year after the heavy spring floodwaters pour out from the many rich tributary creeks. The South Fork of the Yuba is the place every beginning gold miner seems to head for first, and with good reason. It is continually supplied with gold from 3 channel crossings, one about a quarter-mile upstream from State 49, another about 1.5 miles upstream from Edwards Crossing, and the best channel of all, the one crossing 2.5 miles southwest of Washington. The two previous channels are in pretty rugged country, and a trip to either of these spots is usually profitable. The Middle Fork also has its good areas, these being about 1 mile northeast of Badger Hill Diggings and at a point approximately 1.5 miles west of Gold Canyon. The latter location is where the fabulously rich forest channel crosses the Middle Yuba. Drift mines on this channel were turning out 6-inch nuggets as late as the 1930s. The North Fork has only one significant channel crossing, but I wouldn't recommend it because it is right under State 49. The real gold in the North Yuba comes down from creeks such as the Canyon, Slate, Goodyears, Rock, Empire, Lavazola, and Pauley, as well as the Downey River. I recommend you bypass the North Yuba altogether and start hiking up one or more of these creeks during your stay in this area. Most people who do never are sorry. Leaving the Yubas behind, we venture towards the final grand river system in the Sierras, known as the Feather River and its untamed forks. The vast Lake Oroville, created by the impressive Oroville Dam, has submerged many promising spots along the North Fork, West Branch, and Middle and South Forks. This ambitious project aims to transport the river's waters over 500 miles southward to parched Southern California. However, despite the dam's dominance, there remain numerous unexplored areas, particularly in the treacherous Middle Fork. The South Fork encounters a tertiary channel in its upper reaches at the Feather Fork Mine. Just downstream from this crossing, the river plunges beneath the depths of the Little Grass Valley Reservoir. Yet, a significant expanse of pristine wilderness awaits downstream from the reservoir, teeming with gold that was swept down from the channel prior to the reservoir's construction. Delving into the North Fork can prove chaotic and is best avoided, as a heavily trafficked highway runs parallel to the river for almost 40 miles. Even without this hindrance, the river has been so extensively dammed that the gold reserves have not had the opportunity to replenish themselves. The West Branch of the Feather River boasts the discovery of California's largest gold nugget, the renowned Magalia nugget. Unearthed near Sawmill Peak during the early days of the gold rush, it weighed an astonishing 54 troy pounds. Oh, the thrill of stumbling upon such a treasure in the depths of your pan. It likely originated from the rich Magalia Channel, which seems to have intersected the humble West Fork of the West Branch. Alas, this entire region is rapidly being populated, and I was taken aback by the sight of sprawling subdivisions emerging on the ridges overlooking the West Branch. Lastly, the Middle Fork, a realm of unfathomable wilderness and ruggedness, harbors pockets along its banks that likely haven't seen miners since the 1930s. During those desperate times, when families struggled to survive, men scoured every gold-bearing stream in the Sierras. For them, the pursuit of gold was infinitely preferable to enduring the deprivations of a soup line. If one possesses the fortitude of body and spirit, alongside the appropriate accoutrements, an expedition into the Middle Fork of the Feather River might just be the key to unlocking prosperity for years to come. However, one must proceed with utmost caution. Becoming disoriented, sustaining injuries, or encountering rainfall whilst ensconced within the depths of the canyon could spell a precarious fate. The canyon walls boast a precipitous slope of approximately 50 degrees, plunging precipitously to the river's edge without a trace of beach or shore within the gorge. When the heavens open, one must either cling to stakes driven into the canyon walls or succumb to the treacherous waters. Yet do not allow the previous passage to deter your adventurous spirit. This is one of the rare locales within the Sierras that necessitates such extreme vigilance, for most other rivers are adorned with sandy havens on either side, offering respite should the waters surge. Nevertheless, whether traversing a grand river canyon or meandering along a modest creek in the Sierras, always be mindful of a potential escape route in the event a tempestuous rainstorm materializes, looming ominously on the horizon unbeknownst to you. And of course, do not neglect to carry your trusty compass and snakebite kit. Whilst you venture within the river canyon, keep an astute gaze for fragments of reddish, cement-like rock adorned with embedded white quartz pebbles. These remnants are indeed vestiges of the tertiary channels, signifying that you tread upon the correct path. And thus, my dear friends, there you have it. I fervently hope this compendium of knowledge shall prove invaluable in your pursuit of gold, as it stands as the most reliable and factual information I could assemble for this noble purpose. Although I cannot guarantee your ascent to opulence, I can confidently assert that should you embark upon a few miles of arduous trekking, labor assiduously, and remain vigilant for the conditions I have delineated, you are all but certain to unearth a measure of that fabled gold that has long stirred your reveries. In parting, I proffer 3 additional sentiments. Fortune favor you, exercise prudent care, and above all, may your hunt be fruitful.
This particular wagon train was small, hardly fitting the usual image of a bustling caravan. With just 3 modest wagons and a crew composed entirely of Chinese laborers, the group was unique in several ways, most notably because they were transporting a significant stash of gold coins. The journey began as they departed the placer mines of California's Feather River country, setting out on the lesser-traveled Nobles Road. This route eventually merged with Lassen's Trail, a north-south route that had been popular during the gold rush years with Oregon-bound prospectors. The wagon train reached Honey Lake, a typical basin-like lake east of the Sierra Nevada, where they made their first rest stop after crossing the arid Smoke Creek Desert in central Nevada. That night, as they sat around their camp, they reflected on their decision to take this journey and the events that had brought them here. The group had been working together since the early 1860s, laboring along the Middle Fork and upper reaches of the American River. Unlike other miners who had abandoned these sites once the surface gold was gone, this group persevered. They dug deeper, built sluices and engineered ditches and wing dams to funnel water into untouched hillsides, carefully panning out every last trace of gold from the leftover tailings. Over the years, their determination paid off, allowing them to amass a respectable fortune, enough to fill 2 chests with gold dust and nuggets. Their destination was Tuscarora, a booming mining town in north-central Nevada, where a new silver vein had recently been discovered. Thousands had already flocked there, including a sizable Chinese community. Some of their friends and family who had already settled in Tuscarora had sent word of the town's promise, inviting the group to invest in their holdings or join in on the rich silver diggings. For these weary miners whose luck in California had waned, the chance at new prosperity sounded too good to pass up. With winter fast approaching, they knew they had to hurry to reach Tuscarora before the season's first harsh storms made travel impossible. The group considered 2 potential routes. One took them south through the Sacramento Valley and over the steep Sierra Nevada, a heavily traveled path that rose over 6,000 feet before descending into the Great Basin Desert. The other, less traveled route ran eastward and slightly north across northern Nevada, along Nobles Road, eventually connecting with the Applegate Cutoff in the Black Rock Desert. This latter road was mostly used by emigrants headed to Oregon, who had veered off the westward Humboldt or Donner Trail near Winnemucca to take a more northerly route. With supplies packed and their decision made, they forged ahead, seeking a new beginning in Nevada's silver-rich hills. The Applegate Cutoff more than made up for any lack of hardship on the Donner Trail. It stretched over 100 miles of harsh, high desert terrain, where finding water was a gamble at best. Springs were rare, and travelers often had to dig to reach any moisture. Midway along this path lay the Black Rock Desert, an unending expanse of alkali flatlands, known for its desolation. Even for those who managed to endure the brutal environment, there remained the constant threat of attacks by Paiute Indians. Diaries from emigrants in the mid-1800s are filled with harrowing accounts of violence and loss from these encounters. Yet, the dangers faced by these travelers were not unlike the violence that Chinese immigrants endured in mining towns across the West during the early 1870s. As stories circulated about beatings and lynchings in towns like Truckee after the Central Pacific Railroad was completed in 1869, the Chinese had more to fear than the desert. When the railroad work ended, Chinese laborers, who had been vital in its construction, were left jobless. White workers resented them for taking jobs at lower wages, leading to growing hostility. In many towns, white residents were determined to drive out every Chinese worker. With tensions running high, the Chinese travelers knew better than to venture south through the more populated and hostile regions. They opted instead to head directly east, steering clear of areas where racial violence was common. Though accounts vary, the group likely consisted of no more than 8 or 10 men. They prepared well, buying sturdy wagons and strong mules. 2 wagons carried their precious cargo, chests filled with gold, and the third held supplies for the journey. Following Noble's Road, they set up their first camp at Honey Lake, located on the southeastern edge of the Smoke Creek Desert, where it meets the Black Rock Desert near Gerlach, Nevada, a place known as Mud Springs back then. After crossing Smoke Creek and entering Nevada by nightfall, the group stopped to discuss their route. They considered the shortest path to Tuscarora, which would take them east and slightly north in a near straight line. But that route would lead them through a desolate alkali wilderness, a barren stretch of dust with little chance of finding water. Some members voiced doubts, wondering if they would even be able to recognize the Applegate Cutoff when they reached it, somewhere beyond Mud Springs. They recalled hearing back in California how the Black Rock Desert was notorious for its relentless heat and dust storms that could rage for days. As dawn broke and the desert winds began to whip up blinding clouds of dust, even the most determined among them realized that pressing east would be a death sentence. They chose instead to turn south. Though the southern path was also a sagebrush-covered desert, it offered a reprieve in the form of Pyramid Lake, a desert oasis. They had enough provisions to reach the lake and then continue southeast to the Humboldt River, where they could join the Donner Trail and follow it almost all the way to their destination. The group turned south, and their journey toward Pyramid Lake was uneventful. As they traveled along the lake's western shore, they grew more confident in their choice of route. But near the lake's southern end, disaster struck. In the early hours of the morning, a renegade band of Paiute Indians attacked their camp. In the summer of 1933, an elderly trader who had spent his life in the area shared a story he claimed to have heard firsthand as a young boy. Before his death, he recounted the tale to a Nevada newspaper. There were 3 wagons and maybe 7 or 8 Chinamen camped on the west bank of Pyramid Lake. This was long ago. The Chinamen couldn't shoot straight, and they were frightened. The Paiutes wanted payment for trespassing on their lands, maybe a mule, some food, clothes, or a gun. The Paiutes didn't bother with councils or negotiations. They saw an opportunity to gain goods from these foreign trespassers. All night, they watched the Chinamen and finally revealed themselves from a distance at dawn. But instead of talking, the Chinamen ran to their wagons and started shooting. The Paiutes wanted to talk, but the Chinamen wouldn't stop firing, so the Paiutes shot back. By the end of an hour, every Chinaman was dead, while not a single Paiute was harmed. Inside the wagons, the Paiutes found a bounty: food, clothes, needles, and even mules and dynamite. They also discovered heavy boxes filled with China gold, each with handles for carrying. One box was so heavy that they threw handfuls of coins into the lake to lighten the load. Eventually, some of the Paiutes grew impatient, wanting to leave with their spoils. They took the remaining box of coins and placed it at the base of a cliff. Then they climbed up, dislodged rocks, and pushed them down over the box. For good measure, they broke off the edge of the cliff, burying the box and coins deep under the rubble. That was a long time ago, but I remember it clearly. I was very young then, but the box is still somewhere near Pyramid Lake. The only problem is, the Paiutes didn't mark the place. At the southern end of Pyramid Lake, near the Truckee River's entrance, lies the community of Nixon. In the summer of 1967, a bulldozer operator unearthed a hoard of gold coins valued at over $3,000. Many believed this was the lost Chinese gold, until it was found that some of the coins had dates as recent as 1917. Over the years prior to 1933, gold coins had occasionally surfaced along Pyramid Lake's shores. Since then, however, none have been found. Why? Possibly because Pyramid Lake's shoreline has receded by about 3 feet since the early 1930s. This means any coins that were buried in the lake's muddy areas now lie much farther from the current shoreline. Likewise, the cliff where the main hoard was supposedly buried would now be significantly further from the lake. A century of shifting sands and erosion has likely reduced the chances of uncovering these hidden treasures. Yet, the mystery and occasional discoveries, like those at Nixon, continue to make the area around Pyramid Lake a tempting spot for treasure hunters, each hoping to find that elusive lost hoard. The rugged and unforgiving expanse of Death Valley has been a siren call for dreamers and fortune seekers for over 150 years. Its endless miles of barren, waterless wilderness have witnessed countless treasure hunters chasing legends that shimmer like mirages in the desert heat. The allure of hidden riches remains alive, passed down through stories that refuse to die. In the old days, these adventurers were the iconic burro men, hardy wanderers accompanied by their trusty pack animals. But times have changed. The burro men are gone, replaced by a new breed of explorer, the four-wheel drive enthusiasts. These modern-day treasure hunters swear their vehicles can rival the endurance of the burros of old, though whether that's true depends on who you ask. As weekend adventurers ourselves, we've spent years roaming the desert backcountry. 2 fully equipped campers have bitten the dust, and we're now on our 3rd. Have we uncovered any of those legendary lost gold deposits? Not yet, but we're convinced we've come tantalizingly close, so we keep searching. After all, the thrill is in the hunt. One early spring several years ago, we visited Alfred Giraud, a retired sheep herder nearing 80, who lived in Bishop, California. Word had reached us of a gold-rich deposit, discovered and lost in the desolate Saline Valley during the early 1900s. Giraud, as it turned out, knew more than a little about this tale. Saline Valley itself is a forbidding place, a 23-mile-long trough almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. The massive Inyo Mountains loom to the west, the Last Chance Range rises to the northeast, and the towering Panamints separate it from Death Valley to the east and south. It is not a region one ventures into lightly, but we were determined, hoping that Giraud could provide us with some clues before we embarked on our journey. Giraud shared a story that, though rarely publicized, never fails to spark the imaginations of treasure hunters. He told us about Alex Rami, a compatriot of his from the French Alps, who spent years roaming the Death Valley region in search of gold. Rami's life was one of extraordinary highs and devastating lows, a saga that seemed tailor-made for the harsh and unpredictable landscape of Death Valley. In the 1880s, Rami was hunting for another golden strike in the Panamint Range, the heart of desert bonanza country. He was no amateur. He had already discovered and squandered 2 fortunes in his lifetime. Before arriving in Death Valley, Rami had found success in Virginia City, Nevada, where he struck it rich while working a promising claim. His efforts yielded a small fortune of $30,000, a massive sum for the time. But Rami's sudden wealth proved to be his undoing. A man of convivial spirit, he reveled in good company, bawdy songs, and flowing liquor. His generosity and love of a good time made him a popular figure, until the money ran out. One morning, Rami woke up with nothing but a pounding headache and an empty purse. His fair-weather friends had disappeared as quickly as his fortune. Unbowed, the doughty Frenchman rolled up his sleeves and started over. This time, it took much longer for fortune to smile on him again. The rich veins of silver and gold he sought were elusive, favoring other miners, but Rami persisted, enduring back-breaking labor and near despair until finally, his luck returned. Against the odds, he uncovered another rich deposit. This time, though, he was wiser. He chose his companions carefully, limiting their number and avoiding the pitfalls of his earlier indulgences. It seemed the lessons of loss had taught him caution. Giraud's tale of Alex Rami was more than a story. It was a reminder of the resilience and grit that define those who chase the desert's elusive promises. Whether it was luck, skill, or sheer determination that saw Rami through, his legend endures, inspiring treasure hunters like us to keep searching, hoping, and dreaming of our own turn at the wheel of fortune. Once again, Alex Rami found himself flush with cash and ready to revel in it. The honky-tonks and saloons of the day welcomed him back with open arms, and this time, with fewer hands dipping into his pockets, his newfound wealth lasted a little longer. Rami drank, sang, and entertained with his characteristic gusto, stomping and roaring out wild songs to the delight of his companions and the girls who adored his eccentric charm. But the party couldn't last forever. Inevitably, Rami woke one morning to find himself broke, again. This was his second fortune lost, and this time, the realization hit hard. He took a long, sober look at his life and admitted the truth. He had been a fool. Twice wealth had come to him easily, but it didn't return a third time. Forced to work for luckier, or perhaps smarter men, Rami felt his independence slipping away. Disillusioned with himself and with Virginia City, Rami set out into the desert, seeking one last shot at fortune. He eventually wound up in Death Valley, where he spent years prospecting. Though he found only enough gold to keep himself in bacon and beans, he grew to appreciate the stark beauty of the wilderness. His burros became his closest companions, and the wandering Native Americans of the region, who thought him just as crazy as the other whites searching for gold, became his friends. They shared with him invaluable knowledge of hidden springs scattered throughout the barren lands, information Rami carefully stored away. As the years passed, Rami roamed farther into the wilderness, his burros carrying his supplies of food and water. A seasoned desert traveler, he should have been the last person to fall victim to disaster, yet disaster came for him nonetheless, and this time he invited it. Rami decided to cross the Last Chance Range, which sprawls north and west of Death Valley's upper tip. Around the southern end of the range, he found promising rock formations that reignited his hopes for a bonanza. He knew water could be found far to the west in Saline Valley, so he pressed on, shovelful by shovelful, convinced he was on the brink of uncovering the vein that would secure his old age. But his supplies dwindled, and he finally had to face the truth. It was time to leave. On the morning of his departure, calamity struck. Rami awoke to find his burros had broken free and stampeded. Without them, the old man knew he was in grave danger. His arthritic rheumatism crippled him, and now he had to carry what little food and water he could manage. He cursed the animals as he shuffled south and west, his only hope being to reach water before it was too late. The miles crawled by as his feet worsened with every step. Somewhere between Dry Mountain and Ubahiba Peak, he drained the last of his precious water. Desperation set in, but he clung to a shred of hope, remembering the Native Americans' tales of a canyon where water ran underground and pooled at the surface. If he could reach one of those water traps, he might rest, fill his canteens, and maybe even find his wayward burros. Toward dusk, Rami finally arrived at the spot. With renewed energy, he fell to his knees and dug into the sand with trembling hands. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. His fingers struck hardpan, but no water. He stared at the dry ground in disbelief, his hope collapsing around him. He hadn't considered the drought. There hadn't been rain in years, and in this arid region, water was nowhere to be found. Defeated but not yet ready to give up, Rami knew his only chance was to travel through the night, when the desert air was cooler. Summoning what little strength he had left, he pressed on, hoping against hope to find water before it was too late. Then Rami remembered the hot pools somewhere to the northwest. Though the water was unpalatable, it was water, and the Indians used it for medicinal purposes. Changing his course, he stumbled off, grateful for the bright moonlight to guide him. His mind grew hazy as he plodded over the rough, boulder-strewn terrain. His legs and feet burned with pain, and his throat was so dry he couldn't swallow. His swollen tongue felt monstrous, filling his mouth. At one point, as he rounded a jutting ledge, he collapsed against a rock wall. The crumbling stone beneath his scrabbling hands broke away, and though his instincts as a prospector were dulled by exhaustion, he clung to the fragments. Then he lost consciousness. Somehow, during the night, he must have regained his senses and attempted to move before fainting again. His next clear memory was of opening his eyes to the sight of waving palms, arrowweed, and willows. His swollen feet, 3 times their normal size, were blissfully soaking in a hot pool. Rami later learned he owed his life to his Indian friends. Hearing his cracked voice laughing, singing, and calling, they recognized him and came to his aid. The men carried him to the pools, where a squaw took charge of nursing him back to health. She fed him pounded mesquite beans and lizards, and he rested while his tattered clothes lay cleaned and folded beside him. As he convalesced, Rami noticed a simple hogan constructed of piled stone slabs and mesquite limbs on the side of a low hill nearby. The desolate landscape seemed impossible for survival, yet Rami knew these Indians thrived in conditions where white men would quickly perish. Once he was strong enough, Rami went through his old clothes. He discovered that the Indians had not touched a thing, but as his fingers brushed against a rock in his pocket, curiosity stirred. He drew out the sample, ready to discard it, but something stopped him. Instinct urged him to examine it closely. He stared, almost shouted, but caution silenced him. Even the Indians now understood that gold could buy food, liquor, and trinkets. He discreetly tucked the gold-rich rock back into his pocket. Examining smaller fragments that had broken off, he realized they too were rich in gold. He leaned back, closing his eyes, straining to remember where, in his recent travels, he had picked them up. The Indians told him they had seen burro tracks heading west toward the Inyo Mountains, 9 miles across the sun-scorched saline dry lake. It was a grueling trek, especially for Rami, who lacked a water container. Somewhere along the way he had discarded his canteens, and the Indians could not spare their only pot. They parted ways, with Rami heading west. Weakened by his ordeal, Rami's progress was slow. His feet had barely improved, and he found himself in dire straits again. This time he was rescued by a young French sheepherder named Alfred Giraud. The two men were delighted to discover they were compatriots, even hailing from the same part of the Alps. Later, Rami showed Giraud the gold-flecked rocks and suggested they return together one day to search for the lode. Rami was confident he could find it again, but Giraud declined, saying, "Later perhaps, but now I must tend to my sheep." Perhaps the younger man doubted the delirious old prospector's story. Who could say where those rocks had come from? Giraud was not a gambler. The desert had taken more out of Rami than he realized. When his health failed, and he knew he could never return to that terrible country, he called Giraud to his sickbed. Handing over the gold specimens, Rami gave his friend the clearest directions he could recall from his weakened state. Yet, Giraud did nothing. He was a sheepherder, not a dreamer chasing rainbows. The lode, if it ever existed, remains a mystery lost to the desert sands. About half a century later, long retired from sheepherding, an aged Alfred Giraud finally took an interest in the gold-rich rock Rami had once entrusted to him. Curious, he brought it to an assayer and was stunned to learn that it was incredibly rich in gold. Realizing the potential fortune he had ignored for decades, Giraud set out, far too late, to uncover Rami's lost lode. Determined, Giraud pieced together scattered clues. He heard about an old Chilean miner living in the Kern River region who had spent time in Saline Valley. Intrigued, Giraud sought him out. The Chilean, though frail, shared his story of finding a gold-rich specimen in Saline Valley. When the two men compared rocks, Giraud was astounded. They were identical. According to the Chilean, he had discovered his float somewhere in the vicinity of Ubehebe, along the slopes to the west and south. Though Giraud's heart yearned to search for the lode, he hesitated. The journey to Saline Valley was grueling and remote, and the years had taken their toll. When we met with Alfred Giraud, he still spoke of someday making the trek, but his body no longer matched his dreams. Generously, he shared his memories of Rami and all the clues he had gathered. Inspired by Giraud's account, we decided to pick up the trail ourselves. We made 2 trips into Saline Valley, one in early spring and one in the depths of winter. The journey was not easy. Twisting, snow-covered hairpin roads wound down the steep mountains into the valley, which lay just 1,000 feet above sea level. In winter, the valley was warm, but in summer, it turned blisteringly hot. A few hidden springs dotted the surrounding mountain canyons, and Hunter Canyon, at the foot of the Inyos, offered a cool, flowing stream where a miner still lived. Crossing the bone-dry Saline Valley Playa was another challenge. The unmarked road across the vast expanse was almost impassable. At one point, a massive cloudburst had obliterated our previous path, leaving jumbled boulders strewn across the wash. It took over an hour to crawl the last 3 miles to the hot springs we sought. Did we find Rami's lost gold ledge? Not yet, but we're optimistic. We camped near the string of hot pools, palm-fringed oases that seemed almost unreal in the barren landscape. Exploring further, we found the old Indian hogan still intact, with a pile of mesquite firewood stacked by the doorless entrance. Scattered around were woven basket fragments, potsherds, and chipped tools, arrowheads, rainbow agate, chert, jasper, and even a rubbing pestle with a bowl-shaped matat. Beyond the hogan, smoke-blackened rock shelters nestled in niches along a high limestone wall that flanked the ravine. We felt sure we were close. North and east, dry mountains, barren, gray-brown peaks cut into the clear blue sky. Beyond the ridges, our map marked Ubeheba Crater, with Death Valley sprawling further east. Somewhere in this rugged terrain, Alex Ramey had stumbled upon the gold-rich lode over 60 years ago. How close were we? We could only guess. Though we saw signs of mining scattered throughout the area, we remained convinced that Alex Ramey's lost bonanza has never been found. That rich ledge, teeming with gold, is still waiting for some fortunate treasure seeker to stumble across it, just as Ramey did back in 1904. Will it be us next time? Who knows? But we'll keep searching. The dream of striking gold is too tantalizing to abandon.
Story number 1. The Lost Schwartz Diggings. High above the vast expanse of the Santa Rosa Mountains in Southern California, at an elevation of around 4,000 feet, lies a fabled treasure waiting to be discovered. Legend has it that within these sacred peaks, a lost gold mine or perhaps a hidden cave holds a priceless cache of Indian gold. The tale begins in the year 1890 when Nicholas Schwartz, accompanied by his Indian wife, tantalized the denizens of San Francisco with tales of their prosperous mine. However, their sudden disappearance soon after left the world forever curious about the whereabouts of this mythical fortune. According to Schwartz, he had extracted a staggering $70,000 worth of gold from the mine in just 1 year. Numerous adventurous souls have ventured forth, following Schwartz's supposed clues to the mine's location, only to be met with disappointment. While many have stumbled upon what seemed to be the very spot described by Schwartz, the elusive gold remains hidden, mocking their efforts. Yet halfway along the treacherous path towards the mine, a mysterious inscription carved into a weathered rock offers a glimmer of hope. Etched into the stone is the enigmatic marking EB 1876. The significance of this marker remained a mystery until 1946 when Arthur Kenck of Ocotillo Wells, California, stumbled upon it. However, it wasn't until 1965, after a relentless 15-year search, that Melvin Stedman and Alan DeWeese finally unearthed what they believed to be the exact location of Schwartz's mine. Alas, their endeavors yielded no gold, but instead revealed a trove of abandoned camping and mining equipment, strewn about as if hastily abandoned. Bedrolls, coffee pots, dynamite, sifting screens, and even a wheelbarrow lay forgotten, raising questions about the fate of the unknown prospectors. Why would they leave behind such valuable tools, especially when miners were notorious for their perpetual need for cash? Did tragedy befall this mysterious group? One theory suggests that nearby lies a vast burial cave, known to be frequented by the indigenous tribes. Legend has it that whenever these tribes ventured into the sacred mountains, they returned laden with golden treasures. It is plausible that the ill-fated prospectors stumbled upon this sacred cave and were ensnared by a catastrophic cave-in, forever sealing their fate. However, the truth may forever remain shrouded in the mists of uncertainty. For those brave enough to embark on the quest for this hidden bounty, the journey begins in the south, in the arid wash of Coyote Canyon within Borrego Valley. From there, a grueling 7-mile hike awaits, leading intrepid adventurers up to the lofty altitude of 4,000 feet. The trail, at times no wider than a mere 6 inches, tests the determination and resolve of those who dare to tread upon it. As one wearily ascends, eyes must remain vigilant for any signs of a slide area concealing the entrance to a hidden cave or mine shaft, and perhaps, just perhaps, the long-lost treasure that has bewitched so many seekers. Thus, the tale of this elusive gold mine, whispered through the ages, calls out to those with a thirst for adventure and a longing for untold riches. May the brave souls who dare to venture forth be blessed by fortune, their names etched in the annals of history as they unravel the secrets that lay dormant within the heart of the Santa Rosa Mountains. Story number 2. The Legend of Black Bart. Amidst the rampant lawlessness that plagued the Western Territories during the 1800s, a pressing issue arose, safely transporting gold from the abundant mines to the banks of San Francisco. To confront this urgent situation, an express company was forged. The one that eventually dominated the trade was none other than Wells, Fargo and Company, established in 1850 by the visionary trio of Henry Wells, William G. Fargo, and John Butterfield. With no postal service in place, the express company became the sole reliable means of conveying packages and gold bullion. Naturally, Wells Fargo became a prime target for every audacious outlaw. The inaugural heist occurred in 1855 when Rattlesnake Dick, the notorious bandit from Auburn, intercepted a mule train carrying a fortune of $80,000 in gold dust. Over a span of 14 years, from 1870 to 1884, Wells Fargo endured a staggering 313 stagecoach robberies, 34 attempted robberies, 23 burglaries, and 4 train robberies. 16 stagecoach bandits met their demise, while 7 were sent to the gallows. The total worth of the treasures pilfered by these outlaws amounted to a staggering $415,312.55. Nevertheless, Wells Fargo not only took on the responsibility of transporting gold, but also depositing it safely in its own bank branches, providing receipts that were always honored. Not a single customer they served suffered any monetary loss. Wells Fargo took great pains to establish an immensely efficient police and detective force, offering substantial rewards for the capture of robbers and recovery of stolen treasures. Among the bandits who inflicted the most damage upon Wells Fargo was the infamous Black Bart, the Po-8. This solitary marauder specialized in pilfering gold shipments. Bart embarked on his criminal career well into his middle age, amassing an impressive record of 27 successful heists before his capture. During stagecoach robberies, Bart concealed his identity by donning a flour sack with peepholes over his head. Despite working alone, he often managed to deceive his victims into believing he was part of a larger gang. Bart never targeted passengers. His sole objective was the Wells Fargo treasure boxes. In contrast to the cowboy outlaws depicted on screens big and small, Bart typically operated without a horse, carrying his gun, blankets, equipment, and stolen loot over deserts and mountains on foot. He frequently covered a grueling 25 miles per day, despite the weighty burden he bore. In the second year of his criminal career, Bart began leaving behind verses of poetry inscribed on the empty express boxes, further fueling the legends surrounding his name. Tales of Black Bart's exploits grew, and despite his lack of equestrian aid, he astoundingly managed to rob 2 stagecoaches situated 30 miles apart within a mere 24 hours, traversing treacherous, mountainous terrain. Ultimately, his downfall came in the form of a handkerchief bearing the laundry mark FX0.7, inadvertently abandoned at one of his crime scenes. After investigating 91 laundries in San Francisco, the handkerchief was traced back to a certain C.E. Bolton, an alias for Charles E. Bowles. Promptly thereafter, Bowles, alias Black Bart, was apprehended, tried, and sentenced to 6 years behind bars. After serving his time, he was released in January 1888, only to vanish mysteriously. Regarding the vast trove of stolen treasures amassed by Black Bart during his raiding spree, a significant portion was swiftly recovered. It is believed that Bart either spent or generously distributed some of the ill-gotten gains, while burying the remainder. With his disappearance in 1888, the curtain fell on the career of one of the most dreaded, revered, and vivid characters of the bygone American West. Story number 3. Treasure on War Eagle Creek. In the enchanting land of northwest Arkansas, amidst the rolling hills and babbling War Eagle Creek, dwelled a pioneer named Jim Hawkins. A man of practicality and ambition, he forged his path as one of the earliest settlers in the region. With his skilled hands, he constructed the very first grist mill and distillery near the quaint town of Huntsville. Jim's endeavors flourished, and his coffers swelled with prosperity. Upon his inevitable passing, the reins of his thriving enterprise fell into the capable hands of his daughter, Mattie. Having imbibed her father's wisdom of frugality, she too embraced the art of saving. Alas, Mattie's journey eventually came to an end, leaving the ancestral home to one of the younger Hawkins and his new bride. As they set about restoring the dilapidated fireplace, a wondrous discovery awaited this young couple. Hidden amidst the ancient ashes beneath the central hearthstone, a wire loop emerged, entwined with an iron-bound box. With bated breath, they pried open the mystical container, revealing a treasure trove of gold coins and bills amounting to a staggering $11,000. Their curiosity piqued, they embarked on a further exploration, unearthing several smaller caches that added up to a grand total of $19,000. While this tale may appear fascinating but futile to the untrained treasure seeker, it should be noted that this bountiful discovery transpired in the early 1900s, long before the advent of the metal detector. Yet hope lingered for those who dared to dream. Armed with a trusty shovel and a newfound sense of adventure, the couple began to dig, guided by the whispers of possibility. A mere 6 inches beneath the Earth's surface, they encountered the lid of a strong-shouldered mason fruit jar, its metallic essence beckoning the metal detector's call. Crafted in 1915, the jar held secrets within its confines. Eagerly, they removed the jar from its subterranean abode, hearts pounding in anticipation. Within, they discovered a treasure beyond their wildest imaginings, a 1934 green seal, Julian Morgenthau $50 note, nestled alongside a 1950 green seal, Clark Snyder $50 note. A bonanza of $100 graced their very first foray into the realm of treasure hunting. Fueled by the intoxication of their newfound passion, the couple traded their unearthed riches and their once-cherished detector for a more sophisticated model. With a glimmer of ambition in their eyes, they embarked on a quest for fame and fortune, their hearts alight with the thrill of the chase. As twilight descended upon that fateful day, Darrell, filled with exhilaration, stepped into the store where he had acquired his treasure hunting tools. Breathless and brimming with anticipation, he exclaimed, "I know not what lies before us, but it is grand, concealed within our very own backyard." Engaged in further conversation, he was advised to dutifully refill the hole, for the market had not yet embraced a demand for used septic tanks. Thus, the tale of the beginning treasure hunter draws to a close, with blessings bestowed upon their valiant pursuit. May the gods of fortune smile upon their endeavors as they continue to unearth the hidden wonders that await them. Pat O'Sullivan was a towering figure, his robust frame seemingly impervious to fatigue. Day after day, he toiled relentlessly, consumed by a singular and fervent ambition: to amass a fortune of $30,000 through the pursuit of gold mining. Only then would he return to the place he called home. Through countless fruitless quests, Pat sought a claim that would yield the coveted wealth he sought, fueled by an unyielding work ethic. Eventually, his path led him to Sawmill Flat, nestled along a tributary of Woods Creek in the picturesque realm of Tuolumne County, California. It was here, in Sawmill Flat, that the elusive treasure of placer gold lay in abundance. Pat's aspirations stood a fighting chance of realization, and he wasted no time in securing a lucrative claim. With unwavering dedication, he toiled ceaselessly, amassing his wealth bit by painstaking bit, each day bringing him closer to the life of opulence he envisioned. Unlike his fellow miners who succumbed to the allure of extravagant indulgences in the nearby town of Sonora, Pat remained resolute in his frugality. He stoically endured meager rations, directing all his energies toward the gradual expansion of his treasure trove. His thoughts fixated on the bountiful future that awaited him, his eyes steadfastly fixed on the horizon rather than the fleeting comforts of the present moment. In the realm of unwavering determination, Pat O'Sullivan toiled tirelessly day after day, his dreams slowly morphing into tangible reality. The weight of his golden hoard grew steadily, mirroring the toll his efforts exacted on his own fragile health. But finally, the moment arrived. His pursuit had paid off, his gold amassed a fortune of $30,000. The time had come for his dreams to be realized, for him to bask in the sweet rewards of his labor. With resolve, Pat decided that the following day would mark the end of his sojourn in this haven of opportunity. He would gather his belongings, his precious treasure, and depart from the land adorned with majestic pine trees. Exhausted, he sank into his bedroll, seeking solace in well-deserved rest. Yet, as the sun painted the sky with its golden hues the next morn, Pat's body was beset by an agonizing affliction. Weakness coursed through his veins, rendering him incapable of carrying the weight of his belongings and the precious hoard of gold nuggets and dust. He knew he had no choice but to seek the aid of the doctor in Sonora, a treacherous journey of 4 to 5 miles from his humble camp. Amidst the splendor of his temporary abode, 2 towering pine trees stood, their branches intertwining like old friends. Pat had observed that at a particular hour each morning, the shadows cast by these arboreal sentinels converged. It was at this sacred spot that he resolved to bury his cache of gold, accounting for the subtle shifts in location brought about by the changing seasons and the sun's dance across the sky. As uncertainty shrouded his recovery and the time needed to regain his strength, Pat entrusted his treasure to the earth, hopeful that fate would reunite him with his bounty once more. With every ounce of strength he had left in his frail body, Pat O'Sullivan dug a deep hole where the shadows of the pine trees intertwined, burying his precious hoard of gold. Exhausted but determined, he embarked on a grueling journey to Sonora, desperate for the medical attention he so desperately needed. At times, his weakness was so overwhelming that he resorted to crawling on his hands and knees, inching forward with sheer willpower. Eventually, fate smiled upon him as friends discovered him and aided him on his way. After months of rest and treatment, Pat was finally ready to return to his camp, the place where his hard-earned fortune awaited him. With bated breath, he journeyed back, covering the 4 to 5 mile distance, eagerly anticipating the sight of the 2 pine trees that would reveal the exact spot where his treasure lay hidden, bathed in the morning sun's gentle glow. But alas, Pat had committed a grave oversight. His satisfaction with his clever method of locating the precious gold had blinded him to the importance of memorizing additional permanent landmarks. Fate had a cruel twist in store for him during his lengthy recovery in Sonora. The diligent loggers from the renowned mill that bestowed Sawmill Flat with its name had mercilessly cleared the entire area of its majestic trees. In their wake, only barren stumps stood, offering no solace or hint to aid Pat in rediscovering the coveted spot. His tireless search proved futile, for the elusive location remained forever lost. However, a mere stone's throw away from Sawmill Flat lay a place known as Yankee Hill, nestled near Columbia in the enchanting Tuolumne County of California. It might be wise to embark on a quest of research or engage in random detecting in this vicinity, for within its depths lies a tale shrouded in vagueness, yet brimming with potential truth. As Alan Pankey ventured across the vast field, a surge of hope and frustration enveloped his being. The frustration stemmed from the misfortune of his beloved metal detector, lost in transit from Denver to San Francisco. However, a glimmer of hope flickered within him as he sensed the potential of this treasure-hunting site. Thankfully, he had his trusty backup detector, the White's Series 2 hip mount, safely stowed as carry-on luggage. Yet his mind couldn't help but wander to his White's Pro detector, possibly languishing in some distant airport. Observing his friend Paul vacating a spot that resonated with Alan's intuition, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Reflecting on past experiences where rationality overruled intuition, leaving him empty-handed, Alan resolved to trust his instincts. Slowly and meticulously, he combed every inch of the ground, sometimes retracing Paul's steps. Aware that his machine was more advanced, Alan remained optimistic, despite unearthing mere metal debris and century-old bottles. Peering at his watch, the clock ticking towards 11:30 a.m., Alan realized he had been detecting for over an hour and a half. Only a solitary wheat penny and some meerschaum pipe stems graced his discovery pouch. A modest start, but it could have been worse. Once again, his thoughts drifted to his lost favorite detector, entangled in the labyrinthine web of airlines. Nevertheless, he coerced himself to maintain a positive outlook. Almost a year ago, his dear friend Paul had regaled him with tales of his brother Mike's remarkable find in this very field. An exquisite pair of liberty-seated half-dollars effortlessly uncovered amidst the debris. Mike possessed an innate knack for unearthing historical treasures, whether they be bottles, buttons, or coins. In 1985, while meandering along the San Francisco Bay Area, he stumbled upon this nondescript stretch of land. Initially indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain, with its flatness and sporadic trash intermixed with sand and mud, it bore witness to the ceaseless battle between the sea and human intervention. Yet Mike's curiosity led him to explore further, resulting in a serendipitous encounter with a gleaming liberty-seated half-dollar resting atop the surface. Inspired by his friend's triumph, Alan remained resolute in his quest for personal fortune. As the sun pierced through the veil of mist, Alan pondered the prevailing conditions. The air was warm, yet the earth retained the dampness from weeks of incessant spring showers. He knew that the moisture-laden ground enhanced the signal detection of his trusted metal detector. Just at that moment, Alan's detector emitted a distinct signal, hinting at a small and shallow target. Retrieving the digging tool borrowed from his companion Paul, he effortlessly unearthed a brass object that resembled a button, albeit with an antiquated aura, possibly from the 1850s. Encouraged by this discovery, Alan pressed on. Several minutes later, as Alan diligently combed the area that Paul had left behind, a robust signal beckoned from a mere few inches beneath the sandy surface. With the soil being loose, Alan abandoned the tool and scooped up handfuls of earth. The weight of the object hinted at the possibility of it being made of lead, perhaps a disc of some kind. However, as Alan brushed away the sand, he felt serrations beneath his fingertips, revealing the truth he had struck gold. His heart raced with anticipation as he turned the object around and unveiled the gleaming hue of the Liberty Head. Overwhelmed by the momentous find, Alan decided to cleanse the coin in a nearby puddle. With the puddle to his right, and Paul still engrossed in his own search a considerable distance away, Alan approached the water with caution. Every step felt both hurried and languid, his excitement mingling with a surreal sense of slow motion. He gently submerged the coin, watching as the sand dissolved to unveil the full glory of the Liberty Head and the engraved date of 1850. Ecstatic, Alan couldn't contain his jubilation, letting out exuberant cries and twirling in circles. It was then that Paul, intrigued by Alan's commotion, hastened over, eager to discover the cause. Alan gestured for Paul to cup his hands, and with a flourish, he dropped the golden treasure into his friend's awaiting palms. Paul examined the coin and declared, "Looks like lunch is on you." They promptly returned to the exact spot, marking it with a circle drawn in the sand, eager to continue their quest for hidden wonders. After a joyous celebration luncheon, they returned to the site, their hopes soaring, envisioning the possibility that the $10 gold piece they had discovered was just a glimpse of a hidden treasure trove. Tirelessly, they scoured the area for the remainder of the day, their efforts yielding only an Indian head penny and a smattering of buttons. Nonetheless, Alan knew he still had 2 precious days before his departure to Colorado. Fueled by excitement, he acknowledged his tendency to become overly eager at the faintest signal. Rest was imperative. Thus far, Alan's most lucrative find had been a pre-Civil War belt buckle, valued at a modest $200. But now, with his first gold piece in his possession, he dared to dream of something far more valuable. Late into the night, within the confines of Paul's abode, a startling revelation unfolded. The wreath encircling the Liberty Head bore an unexpected inscription, not the customary Liberty, but rather, Duboso. Alan's heart raced with anticipation, for he knew this was no ordinary U.S. gold piece. Memories of the gold rush era flooded his mind, where legal tender was scarce, and private mints emerged to mint gold coins from the abundance of gold bullion. With a dawning realization, Alan understood the magnitude of his discovery. Its worth could surpass $1,000. Without delay, he reached out to his trusted friend Joe Gretty in Colorado, seeking validation. Joe tirelessly delved into his extensive collection of coin books, scouring the pages for answers. Hours later, the phone rang, carrying Joe's exhilarated voice. "Could the Dubozo be Dubosc?" he queried. Astonishingly, a stray smudge had obscured the tail of the letter Q. "Alan, my dear friend, you have unearthed an extraordinary treasure. The revered Red Book claims its value to be a staggering $50,000. A year had passed, yet the memory of that evening remained vivid in Alan's mind. He reached out to his mother, brother, and girlfriend, but they initially dismissed his words as a jest. After much persuasion, they too began to feel the surge of excitement that coursed through Alan's veins. Sleep eluded him that night, for his mind was consumed with anticipation. The following day, news arrived that the missing suitcase had been recovered. With renewed hope, they returned to the site. Alan, aware of his own restlessness, settled into a lawn chair while Paul and Joe, who had just arrived from Colorado, scoured the area. The day drew to a close, and their efforts had yielded naught but an 1850 U.S. Navy button. The site seemed unwilling to surrender any further treasures. As for the origin of Alan's territorial gold piece, he dared not speculate. Late the next day, Alan departed for Colorado, no longer carrying the gold piece in his watch pocket. It was now meticulously wrapped, safeguarding it from the slightest blemish. Upon reaching home, he wasted no time in placing the gold piece within his safety deposit box. Days later, he learned that to sell the coin, it must be authenticated by the esteemed American Numismatic Association. Fortunately, the association's headquarters were a mere 100 miles away in Colorado Springs. Swiftly, Alan obtained the coveted ANA certificate. His gold piece, an extraordinary 1850 Dubosc $10 coin, stood as the seventh of its kind, and the finest in condition, an AU 5555. 5 specimens resided in private hands. One found its home in the Smithsonian, and another nestled within the renowned Bank of California collection. An appraisal followed, with the coin dealer valuing it at over $50,000, a staggering sum that left Alan astounded. Almost a year had passed since Alan's fortuitous discovery of the valuable gold piece, yet his passion for relic hunting remained undiminished. He reminisced about his humble beginnings, starting with his quest to find coins using a metal detector. However, it was his visit to Fort Sedgwick in Colorado that captured his heart and ignited his fascination for uncovering military artifacts, belt buckles, bullets, buttons, and insignia. Fondly recalling his first machine purchase in 1978 and the training from C&D Detection of Denver, Alan admitted that he had stumbled upon a fair amount of jewelry and coins, but never a gold coin until that fateful day. It was the thrill of pursuing the long shots, venturing into high trash areas that others had given up on, that truly captivated him. When asked about the secret to his success, Alan pondered deeply before responding. He emphasized the importance of paying one's dues, investing countless weekends with little to show for it, or even no sense at all. Above all, patience was key. Understanding the intricacies of his metal detector, its strengths, weaknesses, and limitations was crucial for success. And, perhaps most intriguingly, Alan revealed that he relied on his intuition, which had seldom led him astray when it came to identifying promising sites. For Alan, the joy of relic hunting lay not only in the value of the discoveries, but also in the satisfaction of realizing that an ordinary person like himself could stumble upon something extraordinary. His ultimate dream was to unearth a Confederate fort site, and one couldn't help but believe that when that day arrived, luck would surely be on his side. During the month of April, 1846, the Donner family was making preparations to go west. Stories of California's unbelievably mild climate, rich, fertile soil, and expanses of land on which emigrants could settle at little or no cost was an irresistible lure. The Donners, headed by George Donner and his wife Tamsin, were people of considerable means. Indeed, all the emigrants who let their Sangamon County, Illinois homes with the Donners that season were financially well off. In the book, expedition of the Dawn Party, Eliza Donner notes that had it not been for the financial depression of 1846, a much greater number of people would have joined the westward migration. Further, she wrote in detail of her family's extensive preparations. Strong, commodious wagons were constructed especially for their trip. 3 wagons each pulled by 9 well-trained oxen and with an extra team in reserve for each wagon, plus cows to furnish milk. Several beef cattle, 5 saddle horses, and a watchdog formed only the basics they're planning. They loaded, in addition to their own personal supplies, which were calculated to last them throughout their journey, bolts of cloth and jewelry for Indian peace offerings, oil paintings, school books, botanical apparatus, and other materials with which Tamsin Donner, a school teacher, planned to establish a ladies' seminary in California. There were rich stores of silks, satins, velvets, and other valuable cloths, which were intended to be used in exchange for Mexican land grants. Eliza Donner also described the money which her father was taking along. She states that a liberal sum for meeting unexpected expenses as might arise along the way was stored in 2 buckskin girdles to be worn in concealment about the person. Her mother was a writer and was preparing a book detailing their journey. Installments were to be printed by the Springfield, Illinois Journal, published by the Honorable Allen Francis, U.S. Consul at Victoria, British Columbia. Because of this arrangement, Francis was shown the Donner's complete inventory. He was witness to the most secret portion of that inventory, a sum of $10,000 sewn carefully inside sections of a quilt and carefully hidden in the wagon, which would serve as the family's overland home on wheels. As to the inventory of George Donner's elder brother, Jacob, we have no written record except that he also had 3 well-provisioned wagons. We can nevertheless assume that Jacob and George Donner's wagons, teams, and general equipment were practically identical, since the 2 families made their preparations together. It can also be reasonably assumed that a generous amount of cash was carried by Jacob Donner, for he too had amassed considerable wealth during his 60-odd years. The Donner Party might easily have been known instead as the Reed Party. Sometime in the fall of 1845, James Fraser Reed wrote to a fellow Mason, James M. Maxey of Independence, Missouri, asking him for information on what provisions would be necessary for an overland trip to California. On November 10, 1845, Maxey wrote Reed a long letter in reply. In it, he advised, "Don't be puny, cheap. Get a good outfit, and the journey is nothing but don't forget to take plenty to eat and all the money you can." So, it appears James Reed had determined to make the trip sometime prior to the Donner's decision. AI had been advised quite early to take all the money, sick, you can. Like the Donners, Reed was a man of substance. He had been a furniture manufacturer, invested in profitable railroad holdings, and held government office up to tea time he left Illinois. Reed may even have been more wealthy than the Donners. His family wagon was unlike any prairie schooner to cross the plains. Specially built, it had an entrance on one side with easy steps, which led to an enclosed room between the front and rear wheels. Cushioned seats mounted on springs provided the last word in riding comfort. And should inclement weather be encountered, a small iron heating stove complete, with pipe conveyed through the canvas roof, provided a means of combating any interior chill. The Reeds had beds atop platforms at both ends of the wagon. Beneath these raised platforms was storage space for personal effects. Drawing Reed's luxury rig was 4 yoke of oxen commanded by hired drivers. 2 additional wagons were loaded with provisions, tools, furniture, books, and even champagne and brandy. These last items were hauled amid his vast stores 1,000 miles to the Rocky Mountains, where on July 4th, he magnanimously provided drinks for everyone in the caravan to toast the national holiday. Reed's wife, Margaret, had a servant woman to help with the washing, cooking, and minding their 4 children. In all, Reed employed 5 people to drive his wagons and do general camp work. Even Reed's personal horse was a blooded thoroughbred upon which he would later gallop hither and yon, much to the bitter envy of others who had only mules' mounts. No, this train of 9 wagons which rolled away from Sangamon County, Illinois on Thursday, April 15th, 1846, was no sad group of impoverished sodbusters. Quite the contrary. George Donner's wife, Tamsin, wrote a letter to her publisher while encamped at the forks of the North-South Platte Rivers on June 16, 1846. Their rather uneventful 2-month journey was described as follows. "Indeed, if I do not experience something worse than I have yet done, I shall say the trouble is all getting started." She could not know what horrors ahead. The original 9 wagons of the Donners and Reeds were now joined by 13 others. Kindly, George Donner, known to all as Uncle George, was elected captain, and their combined caravan turned southwest from the road to Fort Hall at Little Sandy Creek on July 19th. Reportedly waiting for them near Bridger's Fort was none other than Lansford Hastings, author of popular Emigrant's Guide to California. With such a notable personage of the frontier to guide them, there seemed little question that they could beat all of the other wagon trains that had chosen to take the regular route via Fort Hall. Hadn't Hastings written that his detour would save them better than miles? But upon arriving at Jim Bridger's trading post, or fort, as it was generously called, they found Hastings had already left, piloting another group. Deciding to follow in his tracks, they left Bridger's last meager outpost of civilization and embarked upon a route so poor that it would be August 26th before they reached the southeastern shore of Salt Lake. Here, at a place known as Black Rock, they laid to rest one Luke Halloran who had a lung ailment which he had hoped California's climate would improve. Prior to his dying, Tamsin Donner nursed and tended him. He had no family, and in the moments before he reached death's door, he told the Donners to take his possessions in return for their kindness. His property consisted of a horse and gear and a trunk. In the trunk, the Donner family found $1,500 in gold and silver coins. Ahead now, and westward, lay an expanse of salt desert which Hastings had described as a 40-mile trek. The men filled all the containers with water and cut grass to carry for their livestock. The women cooked food for 2 days, the calculated time necessary to travel that distance, if they moved day and night, and on August 30th, according to Reed's diary, they set out. 2 days and nights had been expected for the crossing, but it was to be a weary 5 days before the last wagon reached Pilot Peak on the desert's western edge. It should be here noted that nowhere in the contemporary writings by survivors or historians of the Donner tragedy is there a single shred of evidence that George Donner, or anyone else, cached a hoard of money somewhere on these salt flats. Stories to the contrary must be relegated to wishful thinking at best and pure hokum at worst. The facts are that James Reed's drivers unhitched his thirst-crazed oxen about 40 miles from the water at Pilot Peak and drove them there minus their loads. The oxen, smelling water after some distance, broke away and could not be found later. One of George Donner's wagons literally began coming apart as the wood shrank from the dry desert heat and was abandoned. A trench was dug alongside Reed's wagons, and in it were placed 2 wagon beds and about half of his family's belongings. Reed's 3rd wagon was pulled by a remaining ox and cow, plus 4 oxen loaned him by others in the party in return for some of his provisions. The contents of Donner's broken wagon were simply transferred to his other 2. In early April 1927, Charles E. Davis reportedly found the buried Reed wagon beds at a depth of almost 6 feet. This was only accomplished after much painstaking and meticulous research concerning the wagon train's fateful route. Previous to finding the Reed cache, Davis also found, in October, Luke Halloran's grave. In neither case was discovery of money found. For the Donner party, it was now the beginning of September. Every member knew they must reach the Sierra Range of California by October to avoid entrapment by snow. They pushed on, following Hastings' trail even yet, for they were now far beyond any prospect of turning back. Surely the Humboldt River, along which ran the regular trail, was not far ahead. Imagine, if you can, how appalled they must have been when in the course of their race against time, the tracks of Hastings turned due south. Everyone knew California lay to the west. Was this man Hastings completely mad? It was a route which Hastings had wished to explore the previous spring, when he had been voted down by Jim Kleiman, whom he had guided east from California. South, the Donners now trudged for 3 days, paralleling the Ruby Range. About September 21st, the trail turned maddeningly north. going back in the same direction they had just come, only now on the Ruby Range's western slope. A member of the party, William Eddy, reflected that they were only a day's hike over this range to their own southbound trail. He and others as well knew their race against time was lost. They sent 2 men, Charles T. Stanton and William McCutcheon, ahead on horseback to try to reach Sutter's Fort in California. They were to bring back supplies which would be paid for upon the train's arrival there. On September 26th, Reed's diary notes they reached the regular wagon route of the Humboldt River. Well rutted and worn, it was plain that all the wagons which had taken the route by Fort Hall had long since passed by. As the party grew increasingly more desperate, tempers began to flare. Petty annoyances of the past became fuel for outright ag aggression. The Donner wagons, having stronger teams, had gradually pulled ahead. Then, on a sandy grade near present Red House, Nevada, blood was spilled. John Snyder swore he needed no help from anyone and began beating his oxen with his whip handle. James Reed remonstrated Snyder for this needless cruelty, and Snyder struck Reed on the head with his whipstock, laying open Reed's scalp. Reed's wife tried to intervene only to be struck herself by the enraged Snyder. Reed drew his hunting knife and plunged it into Snyder's chest before dropping to his knees from another blow from Snyder's whip. Snyder was mortally wounded, however, and fell dead shortly afterward. Reed's original partners, the Donners, were far ahead. His own heavy wagon, pulled by a mismatched team, had fallen in with the slower group. Most of those in this group were further down his own social ladder and by reason of envy were hardly to be called his friends. In addition to this animosity was the fact that Snyder had been engaged to Mary Graves, a friendly, robust girl of 19. Louis Keseberg upended the tongue of his wagon and encouraged the Graves clan to hang Reed on his improvised gallows. But with Reed stood William Eddy and Milt Elliott, 3 men of courage and known fighting ability. Clearly, only more blood was likely to soak the arid land whereon all stood, and time's clock was still ticking against them all. As a compromise, it was decided that Reed must be banished to prevent further bloodshed. Actually, banishment in this land of the hostile Paiute was a death sentence in itself. Reed was allowed saddlebags and blanket, his horse, and no more. Full of grief, James Reed had no choice but to leave his family, beseeching Eddy to care for them, which Eddy promised to do. Sometime later, he overtook the Donner wagons and described to them what had occurred in the rear group. Reed could not survive alone, the Donners said, and Walter Heron, one of Reed's teamsters who was assisting the Donners, volunteered to accompany him. Heron had no horse, but Reed was mostly walking anyway, for his once high-stepping mare was too gaunt to ride. Near the end of October's first week, the rear group reached the bend of the Humboldt. Here the sluggish river turned southwest to its sink. Here also Louis Keseberg told an old Belgian, Hardcoop, to walk or die, forcing him out of his wagon in which he had for so long been riding. That night, Hardcoop did not come into camp, and Eddy kept a fire going on a hillside to guide the straggler. Next day, Eddy, Mrs. Reed, and Milt Elliott asked Keseberg to return for him. Keseberg refused. They next appealed to the Graves and Breen families for the loan of a saddle horse so Eddy could search their back trail. Graves replied he would not risk a horse's life for that of Hardcoop. Breen rationalized this inhumanity, saying in all likelihood the man was dead anyhow. Eddy then said he would go back on foot if the others would only wait. Silence spoke the negative reply. Concern for one another had clearly been abandoned among the majority there on the bend of the Humboldt. Indians began harassing the train as it went along, particularly at night. On October 13th, they shot arrows into 21 head of stock. Not being hunters of large game, the Indians' bows were weak, but they smeared their obsidian-tipped arrows with snake venom, and many of the weakened oxen succumbed or were rendered useless. Reed's heavy wagon had to be abandoned, then Eddy's. What few provisions the families had were placed in the Donner wagons, now rejoined to the rear group as they approached the arid Humboldt Sink. 40 miles of dry desolation lay between them and the Truckee River. Eddy, his wife, and 2 small children were reduced to walking across this hellish stretch. On the second day, he would have to threaten to kill Breen unless the man gave Eddy's children a little water from his wagon's cask. 2 days and nights were required to cross the desolate Humboldt Sink. On the first night, George Donner buried several cases of books and some furniture to lighten the load of his flagging animals. As the party straggled on across this wasteland, the 5 Donner wagons and that of Mr. and Mrs. Wolfinger fell behind. 20 miles east of present Wadsworth, Nevada, Wolfinger's wagon was lost to sight. With him were 2 other Germans, Joseph Reinhardt and Augustus Spitzer. Mrs. Wolfinger was walking ahead with the Graves and Breen families. Wolfinger was known to have in his wagon a large amount of money. Mrs. Wolfinger was remembered by many for the elegant dresses and expensive jewelry which she wore. When camp was made, only Reinhardt and Spitzer came in. They told a suspicious tale of Wolfinger deciding to cache all his goods and requesting that they assist him. Before the job could be done, they said, Indians had attacked them, killed Wolfinger, and carried away his body and property. McGlashan, in his History of the Donner Party, records that George Donner did not believe their story and made some notes for an investigation at a later date. Other than this, nothing could be done except to press on. At or near the Truckee River, Stanton, who had been sent ahead with McCutcheon for supplies, returned with 7 pack mules loaded with provisions from Sutter's Fort. Now, with food in their bellies, good water at hand, and the months of desert travel forever behind them, the band of emigrants became fatefully overconfident. At broad Truckee Meadows, now the site of present-day Reno, they dallied for a week and thus sealed their doom. George and Jacob Donner's wagons were the last to pull out toward the high peaks of the Sierras, where heavy clouds hung ominously. Descending a bank of the river, one of George Donner's wagons lurched and broke an axle. This iron-willed German from Illinois then chose to fell a tree and shape from it another axle. In doing so, a chisel slipped and cut deeply into his hand. Little was thought of it, but the wound would later kill him. On the evening of October 31st, the Breen family reached the lower end of Donner Lake. Next morning, accompanied by the Eddies and Kesebergs, they pushed on past the lake, determined to cross the Sierra, the last barrier in their path. But the path itself was buried under 5 feet of snow. About 3 miles short of the summit, they could go no farther. They returned to the lake and made camp in their wagons, for that night rain fell in torrents. But they were elated at the coming of rain, for rain would melt the snow up ahead. Back home in Illinois, perhaps it would have melted the snow, but not in the lofty Sierras. Rain in the valleys meant snow on the heights. They found this out to their dismay when they again tried to make the summit. Even Sutter's mules were soon belly-deep and helpless before the party reached the point from which they had turned back previously. The Donner group never made it to the lake. They encamped some 8 miles below on Alder Creek. George Donner's wounded hand was swollen and hot, with angry red streaks showing on his forearm. They sent a man ahead to the lake camp, and he was told of the seeming impossibility of crossing their final barrier. Meanwhile, James Reed and Walter Heron had reached Sutter's Fort and there met McCutcheon, who had been unable to return with Stanton because of illness. Reed went to Yerba Buena, now San Francisco, and raised $1,500 plus some men to rescue the snowbound emigrants. McCutcheon secured from the communities of Napa and Sonoma about $500 in donations and horses and mules as well. But many weeks had gone by. By mid-December, death by starvation stalked the snowbound pioneers at Donner Lake. Hard bargaining for what remained of the animals took place. Mrs. Reed, without any livestock of her own, offered 2 oxen for one, payable when she reached California. Another traded a gold watch and jewelry for a quarter of beef. Never was anything paid for in money, because no one trusted the others to know of their cash reserves. Bartering was the only safe way, for men had already killed for money. Though suspected previously, this fact became known when Joseph Reinhardt, in delirium preceding death, admitted to the Donners that he and Augustus Spitzer had killed Wolfinger for his money. Spitzer had collapsed from malnutrition earlier. No one ever knew where the 2 murderers had secreted their tainted coins before both were starved to death in the Donner Lake and Alder Creek camps. On December 16th, William Eddy and 14 others, 5 of them women, despairingly left the lake camp on improvised snowshoes to either cross the summit or die in the attempt. Eddy did eventually make Johnson's Ranch, 40 miles north of Sutter's Fort, more dead than alive. Only 1 other man and 5 women lived through the 33-day ordeal of attempting to cross the pass on foot in the middle of winter. and they made it only by becoming cannibals, eating their companions as they fell. As January ebbed into February, matters at the Donner Lake camp became just as gruesome. A diary kept by Patrick Breen indicates how the emigrants had come to regard one another in an entry of December 18th. Saw no strangers today from any of the shanties. On February 18th, 1847, the first relief party of 7 men arrived from Johnson's ranch. They shepherded 21 starving creatures over the mountains, 16 of them children. 3 did not survive the journey. Then Breen notes in his diary of February 26th, "The Donners told the California folks that they would commence to eat the dead people 4 days ago if they did not succeed that day or next in finding their cattle, then under 10 or 12 feet of snow and did not know the spot or near it. I suppose they have done so ere this time." Others, too, would sate their hunger by eating their dead companions. On the last day of February, another party of rescuers led by James F. Reed arrived at the Donner Lake camp. They did what they could for the long-suffering emigrants there and at the Alder Creek camp as well. Then, on March 2nd, they started back over the mountains, taking 17 people with them, all but 3 being children. Prior to their departure, Mrs. Graves had directed William McCutcheon to remove a wooden cleat from the inside floor of her family's wagon. The cleat had kept their table from moving around, but it had served another purpose as well. Its underside had been hollowed out, and in the cavity had been hidden, according to Reed's diary of the second relief, about $800 in gold and silver coin. When the group encamped near the head of Donner Lake, 2 of the men in Reed's party suggested they play a game of chance to decide which of them would get Mrs. Graves' money. Perhaps they were only joking, but Mrs. Graves did not like their sense of humor. She took her money from the camp and hid it. Mrs. Graves, it turned out, would not survive the journey before her, though the flesh of her body was destined to sustain others. 44 years later, on May 14, 1891, Edward Reynolds, on a fishing trip to Donner Lake, found 305 coins at a point midway along the lake's north shore, and about 30 feet from a large rock where legend had stated the Graves' cache to be. Indicating the variety of coins which were legal tender in those early days, or which were at least circulating as legal tender, Reynolds's find included 117 U.S. silver dollars, 74 U.S. half dollars, 55 French 5-franc pieces, 49 Mexican dollars, 5 Spanish 8 reales, 1 Bolivian dollar, 1 German 5 marks, 2 Spanish 4 reales, and 1 coin so badly corroded that identification was not made. Some of the coins were lying upon the ground in plain view, where it was thought the activities of a logging operation 2 years before may have uncovered them. All evidence indicated the money belonged to Mrs. Graves of the Donner Party, but its total amount was not the recorded $800. Did Mrs. Graves make 2 caches? If so, her second cache still remains to be found. Reed left 3 of his men behind to cut wood and otherwise help those emigrants still remaining. At the Alder Creek camp stayed C.L. Cady and Nicholas Clark. Charles Stone stayed at the lake camp. Very soon after Reed left for the pass, Stone made for the Alder Creek camp. Clark was gone from there, hunting a bear. So Stone talked to Cady, and then they both talked to Tamsin Donner. For a small fee, they were willing to guide her and her 3 remaining children out of that snowy morass of human misery over the Sierra to Sutter's Fort. Obviously, her husband George was too far gone from infection and starvation to last much longer. Tamsin, courageous and devoted, said she would never leave her husband's side so long as he were alive. But she seized upon this opportunity to get her long-suffering children out. Would they accept $500 and some beautiful silverware in payment for saving her 3 daughters? Yes, they would. But Cady and Stone took the children only as far as the lake camp, where they left them in Louis Keseberg's cabin. They then went on, carrying only their packs and Tamsin Donner's payment. On March 13th or 14, 4 men came over the pass to Donner Lake. They were William H. Eddy, W.M. Foster, Hiram Miller, and William Thompson. Eddy and Foster were the 2 men who, along with 5 women, had survived among the group which had fled the lake camp in December. Now recovered from that ordeal, they were returning for those who still remained. Nicholas Clark had himself left the camps. But before leaving, he had told Tamsin Donner of her children's abandonment at the lake camp by Katie and Stone. She arrived there in search of her daughters about the same time Eddie's party arrived from California. Eddie ape-paired to her as a saint, come to take her children away at last to California's sunny valleys. For here was someone she could trust, a family friend who had shared their table on the trail many times. She could not impose upon this friendship, however, and so she asked Eddie if he would accept $1,500 in coin in return for escorting her children over the snowy mountains. He replied he would not burden himself with the weight of $100, but he would take the children out or lay down his life in the attempt. Eddie suggested that she prepare to leave with them, too. Tamsin replied she could not go as long as her husband yet breathed. But George Donner was at the Alder Creek camp, some 8 miles away. Perhaps he was dead at that very moment. Still, she would have to go see. The trip there and back would consume the rest of that day. Eddie and his men had brought no extra food, and there was no food in camp, save the hideous fare of Louis Kieseberg, whom they could not take out due to a leg injury. It is doubtful that they would have taken this creature anyway had he been able to travel. For Kieseberg had earlier admitted to them that he had eaten the remaining sons of Eddie and Foster some time ago. So the men bade Tamsin Donner a last farewell, and taking her 3 daughters and the little brother of Foster's wife, they set out and succeeded again in crossing the mountains on foot. Eddie and Foster had now walked the frozen route 3 times. The last organized party left for the Donner Lake camps in early April. This was a frank salvage operation, as there was little hope left of finding anyone there still alive. Led by a practical mountain man and soldier for fortune named William Fallon, this party of 5 was commissioned by Justice of the Peace John Sinclair. Their written agreement stated that they shall proceed to the cabins in the California mountains, and if the property still remains there, that they shall bring away all or as much of said property as they possibly can. Should there be any money either in gold or silver, that the undersigned shall receive 1/2 the same as any other description of property which they may find. Fallon's party reached the camps on April 17th. In his diary, he states that at the camp of Jacob Donner, they found books, calicos, tea, coffee, shoes, percussion caps, and household furniture. He further records, "Knowing the Donners had a considerable sum of money, we searched diligently but were unsuccessful. So they went to the Donner Lake cabins and found Louis Kieseberg there and were obliged to witness sights from which we would have fain turned away and which are too dreadful to put on record. With Kieseberg, they found silks and jewelry amounting in value to about $200. On his person were a brace of pistols, recognized to be those of George Donner, and a packet containing $225 in gold. It was evident that Kieseberg had been to the Donner camp, and Fallon refused to believe otherwise. He put a noose around the wretched man's neck and proceeded to choke the truth from him. His diary records the confrontation. "I said to him, 'Kieseberg, you know well where Donner's money is, and damn you, you shall tell me. I am not going to multiply words with you, nor say but little about it.' Kieseberg begged for his life and finally consented to show the spot where he had cached the rest of the money he had found. Fallon's diary states, "The money had been hidden directly underneath the projecting limb of a large tree, and the end of which seemed to point precisely to the treasure buried in the earth. He dug up $273. Their supplies nearly gone, Fallon's party was forced to leave. They each carried 100-pound packs of clothes and other valuables, and in crossing the mountains were obliged to carry half their loads ahead for a short distance, and then return for the remainder, walking 3 times the actual distance required. Kieseberg struggled along as best he could behind them, over the well-packed snow of their trail. And thus ended the story of the Donner tragedy. But what of the Donner treasures? By all accounts, very little money has been recovered. Though the exact amount is not known, J.F. Reed was known to have had a sizable fortune with him when the ill-fated trip began, as did Jacob Donner. More is known about the quantity of money George carried and his wife Tamsin. We know they carried a liberal sum for trip expenses. $500 of this was given to Katie and Stone by Tamsin Donner, and nearly $500 more was retrieved by Fallon's party. It will be remembered that the Donners received $1,500 from the dying Luke Halloran, and this same amount was offered to Eddie by Tamsin when Eddie took her children from the lake camp. The offer was declined. Then there is the question of what became of the Donners' most carefully guarded possession, their quilt, in which $10,000 was sewn. Georgia and Eliza Donner in later life recalled how their mother, Tamsin, would each day make entries in her diary and journal, and sometimes make sketches of the mountains or other scenery. None of these items were ever found. Tamsin doubtlessly treasured her writings and drawings very dearly. They were very likely valued only second in importance to her money-lined quilt. Can we not speculate that she therefore hid all these items in some secure place? It would have been out of character for her to do otherwise. And where did Spitzer and Reinhardt hide the fortune which they admittedly stole from Wolfinger? Both died of starvation in the emigrant camps without revealing the spot. Charles McGlashan compiled his History of the Donner Party in 1879 when many of the tragedy's survivors were still alive to provide him with first-hand information. In Chapter 20, he writes there was at Donner's camp a large sum of money, between $6,000 and $14,000, which no one ever recovered. The Donner camp was on Alder Creek, a tributary of Prosser Creek, and is located about 1/2 mile northwest of Prosser House, as marked on the U.S. topographical map, Truckee Quadrangle, 1895. The site of the emigrants' lake camp is on the north shore B.F. Don Donner Lake, where a large memorial statue has been erected. Everything seems to indicate that somewhere nearby these two sites, a sizable sum of money in more than one cache, still remains for the skillful searcher to seek out.
Treasures and mines are discovered and then lost. I know it all too well, for it happened to me. In the year 1940, a young one's adventures were often dictated by their place of residence, and as fate would have it, my abode was nestled amidst this vast expanse of the Black Hawk Mine property, nestled between the quaint mining settlements of Randsburg and Red Mountain, located in the heart of California. During these pre-Polish World War II days, the mines surrounding Red Mountain and Randsburg were still abuzz with activity. Oh, the thrill of witnessing the commotion at the renowned Yellow Aster, a mine that had yielded over $35 million worth of gold. But even our very own school property boasted a functioning mine where the older lads were given permission to delve into its depths, provided their academic prowess was up to par. Our leisure hours were predominantly spent exploring the desert that enveloped us in search of that one monumental discovery. One fine Saturday morning, I loaded empty sugar sacks into my pockets, stashed a sandwich, and slung a diminutive canteen of water onto my bicycle handlebars. With determination in my heart, I embarked on a 2-mile journey due south of the Black Hawk Mine, along a dusty path that terminated midway. Once the road ceased, I continued on foot. The terrain was infested with perilous sidewinder rattlesnakes, notorious for their stealthy nature, refusing to give any warning signs. However, I held little trepidation, having dispatched countless serpents with the nearest rock. After all, the 13-year-old prospector knows no fear. That area is full of abandoned mining shafts from 10 feet to 100 feet deep, and they almost never have a warning fence, marker, or enclosure. This particular day, I discovered a number of shafts that were new to me and demanded checking. After floundering around for several hours, an odd buzzing or droning noise came to my ears, led to the snot by hearing alone. I was surprised to find a huge colony of ground bees. There seemed to be millions. Each had its own hole in the sandy ground, and each was busy digging deeper. I watched the industry for perhaps 5 minutes. The bees would disappear into a hole, be gone for a minute or so, then pop back to the surface to deposit a grain of sand, a tiny piece of gravel, or as I discovered later, a tiny garnet. Since they didn't seem to mind my prescience, I grew bolder and moved closer to inspect the glistening little mounds of sparkling material being piled up much like small anthills. Sparkling? Then it dawned on me. The bees were digging up a lot of pure gold. I had heard my stepfather and his friends discuss the approximate value of ores, and they all agreed on one thing. Anytime you can see the gold in a sample, it's rich indeed. Excited, I darted over to the nearest little mound and scooped all that I could into an empty sugar sack. I wasn't fast enough, however, and several irate bees hit me hard. That was the end of my prospecting. In a flurry of kicked-up sand, I ran off. About 2 hours later, I was back home and busy washing out my sample in a gold pan. Even before, had reduced the material to perhaps half of what I'd started with. I knew that I had something worth shouting about. Pure golden grain showed everywhere in the pan. But this time, my stepfather, Charles P. Matthews, came around the corner. Whether more concerned with getting a fresh cup of coffee, or maybe because he was used to seeing me playing at mining, he ignored my excited statement that I'd found a lot of gold. But he forgot his steaming coffee the instant I shoved the gold-laden pan under his nose. In fact, he spilled most of it down his shirt. Being an experienced miner, he soon had the remaining material in the pan reduced to nearly pure gold. A good and fairly accurate rule of thumb way of measuring gold is to figure that 1 teaspoon equals 1 troy ounce. My pan contained about 1 ounce, from certainly no more than 5 pounds of ore. Rapid calculation told my stepfather that the indicated value was about $14,600 per ton, and this was when gold sold for $35 per troy ounce. Of course, my stepfather was eager to find out where I had located the rich sample, and I told him about the bees. I added that I wouldn't have any trouble finding the spot again. Since it was nearly dark, he decided to wait until morning to go back to the bee mine. Shortly after daylight, we piled into our old Ford and headed down the dirt road to the south. After several hours of hearing me say, "I think it's over this way," my stepfather began to lose his temper and patience. This only added to my confusion, and finally, in tears, I had to admit that the mine was lost. My stepfather, understandably upset, tramped around the area the rest of the day, and our relationship grew more strained by the minute. I promised to keep coming back until I found the bees. During the remaining 3 months that we lived there, I must have walked hundreds of miles through the sand and sagebrush searching for the small area, perhaps 10 feet in diameter, where the bees piled their gold-filled mounds. I never found it again. Somewhere about 2 miles south of now abandoned Blackhawk Mine, there may well be a fortune waiting for some lucky prospector. The gold I found may only be a small, rich vein into which the bees dug, or the entire area may be rich. I visited the old Blackhawk site a couple of years ago, and one lived the old memories, mine shafts, bees, and gold in my pan. But try as I might, I couldn't hear any bees. After all these years, one could hardly expect to find bees living in the same place. However, the sandy soil is not conducive to vegetation, and the desert receives little rainfall, so the area may still show traces of where the bees once lived. Some prospector may still stumble onto the bees' mine and become rich. I hope you're the lucky one.